Hello, this is the second video for Lesson 8.5 and it's titled Special Products, and these special products are shortcuts that will help you FOIL a little bit faster if you can recognize the problems and if they are these special problems. There are 3 different special products and you can see them on your notes page. The first 2 are the square of a sum and the square of a difference. And the last one is the difference of squares. It's really important to note what I wrote here up at the top, that these special products only work when you're taking a binomial times another binomial. So this is where we might use the FOIL method, but if we recognize the special products and we recognize what kind they are, then we don't even have to use the FOIL method and we can just use these shortcuts. Okay, we're going to do the first 2, square of a sum and square of a difference, almost at the same time because they are very similar to each other. Now, the square of a sum. Well, this type of problem would look like a sum, we'll say a plus b, and then it's being squared. Remember that squaring means taking something times itself, so if we wrote this out, it would be the binomial a plus b times itself, so that's another binomial, a plus b. So this is how this is a binomial times another binomial, but it's the exact same thing in each binomial, a plus b and a plus b. Square of a difference, go to the other side of the page for a second, the square of a difference is almost the same thing. Instead of a plus sign, there's a minus sign because it's not a sum, it's a difference. So for square of a difference, we would say that looks like a minus b squared. And if we wrote that out as 2 binomials, it's a minus b times itself, because that is what squaring means, taking something times itself. Well, the shortcut to this, so instead of FOILing these out, taking your firsts and your outsides and your insides and your last, instead of doing that, if we know the shortcut and recognize it, then we can just do this shortcut. So right here in the middle, we're going to write the steps to the shortcut because they're very similar for these 2 special products. So the first step of the shortcut is to square the first term. Let's focus on the left side where it says square of a sum. The first term is a. Well, if you square a, that gives you a squared. So that's the first step. The second step is to square the second term. The second term is b, so squaring b, you get b squared. Now you want to put that at the end. You want to put b squared or plus b squared since it's positive. Now, you're not done yet. Some people would think that that's it, but you're not distributing the exponent like we did when we were multiplying monomials. Because of the plus sign in between, you can't just do that. This is a binomial. So there is going to be a middle term here, and that brings us to the third step of our shortcut. The third step says, multiply the terms and then multiply that by 2. So going up here, the terms again are a and b. If we multiply them, that's just a times b. And then we're supposed to multiply that by 2. So for this, I'll just put a 2 in front of it and a plus sign in front of that because everything in this problem is positive. So if I recognize, or when I'm given a problem that's asking me to find the square of a sum, I can just follow this formula to get to the answer. I don't have to FOIL. So let's practice that with an example using something that maybe has some numbers to it. So example 1 for this, let's say that the problem gives me x plus 8 squared. Okay, so if I follow my shortcut steps here, I'm going to square the first term. The first term is x, If I square x, that just gives me x squared. I'm going to square the second term, which is 8. 8 squared is 64, but remember that goes at the end. Positive 64. To get the middle term, it says I need to multiply the two terms together, so that's 8x, and then take that times 2. And I'll put a plus sign in front of that because that'll be positive. And then I actually do simplify that together, and as you get more practice with it, you can do it all in one step there. So 2 times 8x is 16x. So my final answer is x squared plus 16x plus 64. Now, you would get the same thing if you FOIL. So if you at the end of this part of the lesson, if you don't really like these shortcuts, or sometimes you just don't recognize them on a worksheet or on a test or something, you don't realize, oh, that's a square of a sum. You can always do FOIL. So just remember that up here, x plus 8 squared is x plus 8 times itself. And you can go through the steps of the firsts, outsides, insides, lasts if you want to. You'll get the same answer that we got. X squared plus 16x plus 64. Let's do one more example of trying to practice our shortcut here. Squaring a sum. Then we'll go over and we'll square a difference, and you'll see how similar they are. Our other example here, I want to just write it out as 7x plus 2 times 7x plus 2. Sometimes the problems won't be given to us like with an exponent, like it was with the first one. But if it's written this way, you can realize that that's the same as 7x plus 2 squared, because it's taking something times itself. So we can follow our shortcut steps. The first step is to square the first term. So 7x squared, don't forget to square the 7, so that's 49x squared. You also want to square the second term. 2 squared is 4. And then to get the middle term, you multiply your terms, and then you take it times 2. So 7x times 2 is 14x. And then I'm going to take that times 2 to get the middle term. And everything in this problem is positive, so you have all plus signs. And then to simplify it, you just take that 2 times the 14x. So my final answer, I'll write it over here because I kind of ran out of room. You're going to have that 49x squared. And then 2 times 14x is 28x, so plus 28x. And then plus the 4. And that would be the final answer. Okay, you'll really get a little bit more practice with this as we go to the other side and we square a difference. The only difference here is one of the signs. Okay, so if we were to do FOIL, we would get almost the exact same thing. Let me just write here. The only difference is that in front of the second term is going to be a minus sign. So it's going to be a squared minus 2ab, but it's still a plus b squared. And that's because if you were to FOIL it and you did your lasts, this is a negative times a negative, and that would turn into a positive, so that's why that's a plus. Okay, otherwise it's the exact same thing. You just have to remember that when it's the square of a difference and there's a minus sign in the problem up here, that this right here is a minus sign instead of a plus sign. Okay, the first example of this that I would like to do is y minus 12 squared. If you feel comfortable with it, feel free to pause the video, do it on your own, and then check it with me. So to do this, we're going to follow our shortcut steps. Square the first term, that's y squared. Square the last term, remember that'll be positive, So back here I'm going to put a plus. 12 squared is 144. That middle term, remember, it's going to have a minus here. That's the difference with these. And then to get it, I want to multiply my two terms together. That'll be 12y. And then take that times 2. So my final answer will be y squared minus 24y plus 144. Okay. The second example of this one that I want to do with you is 6p minus 1 squared. So this is the square of a difference. We have a difference here that's being taken to the second power. So that's why it's, again, called the square of a difference. So we're going to try to follow our shortcut rules here. It says square the first term. So 6p squared will be 36p squared. My last term, or my second term, square the second term. That's 1 squared, which is 1. Remember, it's a plus 1. Since this is a difference, remember that second term is going to have a minus sign in front of it. We're going to multiply our two terms together and then take it times 2. So 6p times 1 is 6p. And then we're going to take that times 2. So my final answer will be 36p squared minus 12p plus 1. And that is it for that one. For our third type of special product, it's called the difference of squares. And the title of this special product really is describing what the answer looks like. In the other two, square of a sum, that was describing what the problem looked like. It was an addition problem that was then being squared. Or square of a difference is a subtraction problem that was then being squared. With difference of squares, like I said, it's describing what the answer looks like. And so in symbols, the answer here, it looks like a difference, a subtraction problem, of squares. So it's a difference of 2 squares. And we write that a squared minus b squared. Well, the way that we get an answer like this is when we are multiplying two binomials that are almost the same except for the symbol in between the two terms. So the first binomial would be a plus b. The second binomial would just be the opposite. It would be a minus b. So when you have two binomials that are almost the same, there's just one of them has a plus sign and one of them has a minus sign, it will give you an answer that is called the difference of 2 squares. So let's start with an example. Let's say we have the binomials x minus 5 and x plus 5. If I recognize that this is a special kind of problem, then I don't have to go through the steps of FOILing. I know this is a special problem because the binomials are almost the same, except one of them has a minus sign and one of them has a plus sign. So if I recognize that, then all I do is I just square the first term and I square the second term and put a minus sign in between them, because that's all that was up here in my formula. The a got squared, the b got squared, and there's a minus sign in between them. So this would give me, see, x squared, and 5 squared is 25, and I put a minus sign in between them. And that's the answer. Now, if you don't believe me, you can go through the steps of FOILing. So if I go back over here to the original problem, and I go through the steps of FOILing, see, my firsts give me x squared. My outsides gives me 5x. My inside gives me negative 5x, or minus 5x. And my lasts, that's a negative 5 times a positive 5, so that's a negative 25. When you simplify, what happens to the x's? Well, they cancel out. 5x minus 5x is nothing, and there you have the answer that we got. So that proves to you that this difference of squares formula up here really does work. So let's try another example. Example number 2 of this. Let's do 9d plus 4 times 9d minus 4. And it should pop out to you that these are almost the same, except one has a plus and one has a minus. So they're kind of basically just opposites of each other. So when you have a problem like that, you can just square the first term, square the second term, and put a minus in between them. So what is 9d squared, or 9d times 9d? Well, that's 81. I'm going to do this one below. That's 81d squared. And remember, there's going to be a minus sign in between them. And what's 4 squared? Well, that's 16. So your answer, if you FOILed it out, you would get 81d squared minus 16. But we don't have to use FOIL if we recognize the shortcut. We're going to do one more of these. Let's go over here to the right. This is going to be example number 3. Let's say I have 10g plus 13h squared, and then in my other parentheses, my other binomial will be the same thing but with a minus sign, so 10g minus 13h squared. Again, realize, same thing in parentheses, except here's a plus, here's a minus, so they're just opposites. So what we're going to do is you're going to take your first term. Basically, you're only doing the firsts and the lasts part of FOIL. You don't have to do the outside and the inside because they cancel. So if that helps you, you can just realize that this is just 10g times 10g, which is 100, big numbers, 100 g squared. And then you also just multiply your lasts. 13h squared times 13h squared would be a minus. Well, 13 times 13, that's 169. And then h squared times h squared is h to the 4th. So there you have it. Okay, so you're going to have some practice with these differences of squares. They won't always be pointed out to you, but if you recognize a problem as one of the special ones, then you can use these shortcuts. Otherwise, you just stick with FOIL or distributing, especially if you have trinomials involved. You want to make sure you just distribute.